good morning. It's such an honor to be here. I guess you noticed by my name, Pimentel, I am of Portuguese descent, and proud of it, I should say. So I'm going to talk to you today about the American experience in terms of building a common core, a common set of expectations, and we call ours standards. And I want you to go with me a bit about imagining a world without standards. Or without common expectations, if you will. Because when there's a new idea, and you have a new idea here in Brazil about a common base, there are people who will have legitimate worries about, this seems to me that there will, rigidity will come, right? That the conformity, it means conformity. It means we won't meet students where they are. It means the end of creativity. So I want us to think a little bit, how many people here have taken a airline flight in the last year? Yeah, okay. Well, imagine, if you will, with me for a moment, a world where there were no common expectations for airline pilots in terms of what they knew and were able to do. They were long on enthusiasm, but short on skill. I think I'm staying home. Let's take another aspect of our lives. Imagine a world where we had self-declared heart surgeons, right? Big on passion, low on technique. I don't know about you, but if I were going to be operated on by a heart surgeon, I'd want him or her to know a lot about heart surgery. And so the point, one of the things about standards is they actually make our life better and allow us to do and make us freer in many ways. So think about this building even, the one we're sitting in. I doubt many of us have worried that the building's going to come crashing down on our heads, right? Because it has been built to code. And if I extend the metaphor out just a bit and think about the fact that Brazil likely has building codes all over the country, and yet the buildings come in many shapes and sizes and many designs. So there's no sense, just because you've got building codes, that there isn't a lot of creativity. There's not conformity in this. So sort of building on what Dr. Young said, when I think about academic standards for students, to me it is freeing to them. It gives them access to be able to think deeply, to think creatively. Without that knowledge, you cannot. So now I'm going to just give you a moment here so that you understand something about me and why I feel so passionately about a common base, common set of standards. I had two experiences when I was growing up. You know, we never know why things happen to us in our life and why we end up doing what we're doing. So I want to tell you that I experienced up close what I would call the tyranny of low expectations. The first comes in my own family, my brother. So you should know something about my family. Both my parents were professors, and so education was at the center of our life. We came to school very prepared because we were blessed to live that kind of life. We went to the very best schools in the city in which I grew up. And my brother did very well in school, kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth grade, got into fifth grade, and within a few weeks, his grades dropped. Didn't want to go to school anymore, would sort of cry before he would go. So my mother, very concerned, called up the teacher, took another week or so to get in to see the teacher. And when she got in to see the teacher started the meeting by saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Pimentel. I got your son's records mixed up with a slow learner. I thought he was a slow learner. Now I know he's not. Now I know he can actually learn. So don't worry about it. Everything's going to be fixed." Well, what I want you to know about my brother are a couple of things. One is he is a sensitive soul, and that episode of only a few weeks injured him. It injured him. So my parents, through the rest of his secondary career in school, had to get him tutors in order to help him and support him to pass his subjects and then find a college that would accept him. But here's what I want you to know about my brother. My brother is brilliant, and he runs TV stations back in America. And they call him in when a TV station is failing, and he knows how to take a failing TV station and move it all the way up to the top. Nothing wrong with his brain, right? Nothing wrong with his ability to learn. But an adult who he was told to trust looked at my brother, and who knows what she said or she did, but I don't think she said to my brother Mark, "You are dumb. You are stupid." She just treated him as if he were. And I always wondered about the little boy who had stamped on his forehead, "slow learner." Whatever happened to him, and how could he survive? So I grew up seeing that in my own family, where, by the way, remember, he came from an education family. He came from a family of professors. He came with all of what the supports you would want for children to succeed. And this happened to him. So now go a few years further. I was now 20 years old, and I was spending my summer volunteering at a home for young people who had been sent there by the courts. And so they all suffered from some measure of emotional disturbance. And I worked with, and the home life was such that it couldn't support them. So I worked with a group of boys during the day, and at night I lived with a group of the teenage girls. And they used to come up to my room, and we used to have long conversations about life and what they wanted to do when they grew up, and boys and fashion and makeup, you name it, long conversations. So there was one young woman who used to frequent my room quite a bit. Her name was Debbie. And one day I got a call from the school, and the school said, "Can you come be Debbie's teacher? And can you get here a little early so you can see what she's studying," because her teacher was sick. And I said, "Sure." So I went over to the school early, and the headmaster handed me what he said was Debbie's work. And I opened it up, and it was a workbook for, I don't know, kindergarten age, first grade age. It was about telling time. It was about how many minutes there were in an hour. It was about where the big hand went and the little hand went. So I got up and I went to the headmaster and I said, "I think we have the wrong student here, because this cannot be Debbie's work, because I know Debbie." And he said, oh, but it is, because she is mentally retarded. She has a serious cognitive deficiency. And I was stunned. Now remember, I'm 20 years old, and I feel like, okay, what did I miss? And there were professionals who said that she was mentally retarded. So I went back into the room, I opened up the workbook, and Debbie now enters the room. And when she saw me there, she was mortified, because she felt, I mean, you could just see it on her face, that there I was. I knew her in one way, and now I was going to see her in another. She sat down with me, and we opened up the book, and I was going to do the lesson about 60 minutes in an hour, blah, blah, blah. And I kid you not, Debbie could not put two words together in a sentence. She could not seem to follow what I was saying. She could not seem to answer my questions. So after about 10 minutes of this, I closed the book. And I said, "Debbie, let's go for a walk. We're going to have our lesson outside today." And as we walked out of the school, and we were talking this time, and as we moved further and further away from the school, Debbie came back. Her language came back. Her ability to converse came back. Her ability to think came back. There was a spark in her eyes. So I don't know what happened, but I do know this. She did not suffer from mental retardation. Somewhere along the line, maybe because of her emotional disturbance, maybe something that was going on at home, people assumed that she was. They gave her that mantle and she took it. And she acted as if. Right? So there is this place where when we have low expectations and we decide this, who knows on what we do to children, what we do to young people. Now I think as Dr. Young said, setting high expectations, setting standards won't fix all of this, but it does really change the focus. So the focus isn't anymore on a teacher deciding, oh, I think these kids are smart. I think these kids are not. These kids get to learn the good stuff. And these kids, not that I don't want to teach it, but, I don't want to burden them with all of that, as Dr. Young said, powerful knowledge. So it changes the focus from that, who gets it, to how am I going to give all students access to it? Do I need to do something different for one child versus another? Probably, yes, and we must, but all students get access to the good stuff. So with that, I ended up, I have an early childhood degree, I have a law degree, I worked in politics some, and then ended up back in education. And it just sort of so happened that we were talking about what students needed to know and be able to do in the early 90s, and that became what I have done for the last couple of decades. And so I want to talk a little bit now about the American experience as I've worked on standards over the year. We are way behind the UK because we have just put together common standards in English language arts and literacy and in mathematics, only those two subjects, Dr. Young, as of yet. But I want to just say something about the effort. We did have standards, so each of the 50 states in America had their own standards, but they were quite variable, I would say this. And there was a lot of resistance to doing anything common because there's a lot of sort of sense of local control about education in the United States. But there was a point in time where over the years in the sort of 2002 to about the 2009 period, where people were beginning to question, why is math in the state of Maine different than math in the state of California? Why is reading and literature different in the state of New Jersey versus the state of Tennessee? It's not, and it shouldn't be. And so we launched the something called our Common Core State Standards effort. And I want to say sort of why we did it, some of the reasons. I have my 5 C's here. These are 5 C's in English. The first is civil rights. So we wanted to make sure that students get a first-rate education that is not dependent upon where they live or who they are. So something about America you should know. There is a huge chasm between good schools and bad schools, between youngsters who graduate with a good education and youngsters who graduate who can barely read, write, or do math. And poor and minority children, children of color, bear the brunt. They go to the worst schools, where less is expected of them, where the teachers are less knowledgeable and skillful, and where they have the least power to alter those circumstances. What the system dishes out, they must take. So civil rights, which I've heard a lot of talk about today, is at the base of what Brazil is attempting to do. The second is clarity. To give a roadmap, if you will, to students and parents, to teachers about what it is they're going to learn so that they understand clearly what is expected of them. And again, as we've heard today, there are already, in a way, de facto standards, right? Because you've got textbooks. They set out what students should know. And you have assessments. They set out what students should know. But the notion then about your entering into this dialogue about a common base means that it will be transparent, that you will have debates about what students should learn. And you should want that out in the open. So clarity. The flip side of that is a compact with our students that say, if you come to us, you will learn what you need to learn for higher education, for good jobs, for a richer quality life, if you will, for yourself and for your family. So a compact. Then there's a notion of competition. Can't escape it. We have a global marketplace and it is knowledge-based. And so we want to be able to prepare students to be able to compete in the global marketplace, because we're falling behind in America on that. And the last has to do with collaboration, and I want to say, Dr. Young, it's really been interesting that because we had standards for a long time, and teachers grumbled about them all the way along, but there was something that was refreshing to teachers about the Common Core, which actually surprised me a bit. But I think it had to do with this last notion of their ability to collaborate across state lines, to be able to share expertise and share resources. And so when we've taken surveys, not we, people in the United States taken surveys, about 75% of the teachers are in support of the Common Core. And I think it has to do with their excitement. I think there's other issues too that we've helped with the Common Core, but I think a lot of it has to do with their ability to collaborate across state lines. So I want to just talk to you a little bit about how we built them, because you can may be able to learn something from us about how we did it or what we did, and also not make some of the mistakes that we made. So when we were setting the Common Core, we set out 3 principles that would guide our work. The first was that the standards had to be based on evidence of college and career readiness. And by that I mean any standard that went in to our Common Core had to have evidence that it would prepare students to do well, and it was essential for them for whatever they decided to go to a career, to go to a training program, to go into college, that it gave them access to sort of fulfill their dreams. So just something about America that you should know too is that we have, for a very long time, had about, we have students who are following all the rules, taking all the courses they were to take, passing all the tests they were to take, graduating from high school, entering, applying to college, getting into college, and we have about 30 to 40% of our students who then end up in a remedial course or a developmental course, which means that they don't get credit for the course, but they have to pay for the course. And what we know by the statistics is students who land in remedial courses generally do not graduate with a degree. So it becomes a dead end for way too many students. So evidence really ruled the day, and by that I mean, when we were setting the standards, no matter who called us, no matter how important they were in the nation, and said, put this content in or put this concept in, we said, we'll check the evidence, thank you. And no matter how many people lobbied for a particular concept to get in, because everybody's got their favorites, we said, thank you very much. And again, the question was, what does the evidence tell us? And by evidence, I'm talking about researchers who said what was really key for students. I'm talking about assessment results that we had that showed where students were failing. I'm talking about surveys from college faculty who taught in the disciplines of math and science and history and English, who said, when students come to us and they take our freshman courses, this is what they must have. So that was the evidence we kept going back to. And so our first principle about evidence really helped us with our second principle, which was focusing on what matters most. We heard some of this, I think, from Dr. Young as well. Teachers need time to teach, and students need time to learn. And many of the standards we had that preceded the Common Core were large and vague and vast. And teachers sort of fell under the weight of them. And so we promised the teachers in America that we would focus on what mattered most, and we would avoid the trap of long laundry lists, if you will, of concepts and skills that are impossible for all teachers to teach and all students to learn. So that was the second principle. The third principle, very important, was to maintain local flexibility and teacher judgment. We've heard some of that from Dr. Young as well, which means that the standards, and I would submit to you that our standards give teachers, not only give teachers flexibility, but demand teacher innovation, demand teacher creativity, because we have these new higher goals, if you will, and we have students, many students not meeting those goals. And so it really demands that teachers use their know-how to figure out how to bridge the gap between what the goal is and where we know students are. So it does not mandate, we call the word curriculum meaning how you teach, the pedagogy and all of that. The standards do not do that. So different students can achieve the standards in different ways with different teachers. So with those three principles, evidence, focus, and local flexibility, we began our work. And when I say we, there were 3 member teams, one in English Language Arts Literacy and one in mathematics, and I led the English Language Arts Literacy team. And we was under the auspices of the National Governors Association, so our heads of state, if you will, in America, and something called the Council of Chief State School Officers, which is where our state education commissioners all meet together. So under their auspices, we began our work. Now I say 3-member teams, but we had, each one of us in English Language Arts and Math, had a larger team that we facilitated and managed of about 40 experts. And it consisted of a cross-section of researchers, of college faculty, of state education folks. We had librarians in ours, in English Language Arts and Literacy. And both teams were anchored by K-12 teachers, many of whom were recommended by our 2 unions called the AFT and the NEA. So in addition to them, though, we had 48 of the 50 states who wrote in and said, we want to be part of this effort. And in order to do so, and they could volunteer, so they didn't have to accept what we ended up writing, but they wanted to be part of the development process. So they put teams together of mainly K-12 teachers and college faculty who would receive our drafts, so they would receive our drafts and comment on our drafts. And then we have many different organizations like the National Council of Teachers of English, same in mathematics, a variety. We have an International Reading Association, and all of those organizations also wanted to be our partners in writing them. So we were told by our bosses that we had to have a draft out to the nation. We began really in earnest writing in September. By November 2009, which is fast to do. And we were sort of determined to do some new things with our draft. And we had tried some new things. And the only way I can explain it is that the draft was a big, fat flop. So it hit with a thud around the nation because, as I said, we had tried some new things. So we had 5 layers before, like, of overarching standards and objectives and blah, 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 until you got down to the 5th level, which finally told you what students needed to know and be able to do. And then in our brilliance, we decided, we won't write clear statements. We'll write long narrative paragraphs that explain what a student looks like when they're when they can do this stuff. And then in addition, I know, what were we thinking? In addition, we had them grade banded, so think of them as 9-12, think of it as 6-8, grade 6-8. And so to a person, to a team responding to us, they told us, this will not do. Go back to the drawing board. Get rid of the layers. Get rid of the paragraphs. Give us some clear statements, some clear goals. And by the way, while you're at it, make them grade specific. So I want to just talk to you that when we heard in the notion about grade specific, because I heard in England it may be done in some bands. We tried that, but it didn't work for us. So you all have to figure out sort of what works for you. It didn't work for us because teachers contacted us and said, I'll give you an example of a grade 6-8 teacher who said, she was a grade 6 teacher, and she said, so I see that this is what I'm supposed to be teaching, but it's also what the 7th grade teacher and the 8th grade teacher are supposed to be teaching, or what students are supposed to be learning. So I don't know, am I supposed to teach all of it, and then the 7th grade teacher teaches all of it again? Or am I supposed to take a portion of it? Am I supposed to take a third of it? And then which third? Am I supposed to negotiate that with my fellow teachers and colleagues? Or do I just decide what third I'm going to do? So they said, please, please, please make them grade specific. Well, by January of 2010, we had a new draft. And it was a new draft that got rid of the layers, got rid of the paragraphs, grade specific. Didn't mean we were finished, though. And here's what I want you to know, because I think this is really important and may have something to do, Dr. Young, with the less resistance from teachers, or at least the positive feelings teachers have about the Common Core. Don't know if this is part of it or not. And that is that the state teams, remember I talked to you about the state teams, they were very active in the writing. So we were the lead, we had this 3-member lead writers, right? So that information would come into us, and then we would process it, and then we would put it out. But we had, for example, the state of Massachusetts, which is an eastern state, northeastern state, that had excellent standards and said, gosh, we think that the literature standards aren't where they need to be. They aren't rich enough yet, the progression isn't right yet, and we really need to do, we really want to work on these. So they did. And they did line edits. We had the state of Georgia call up and say, we've done a lot with career and technical reading and writing, and we don't see this represented in the draft. And so we set the Georgia folks to work on thinking about students who are in the career and technical path, what they need to do and what they need to be able to know in terms of reading and writing. We had 2 teams, Florida and Minnesota, so one's in the South, one's in the Midwest, call quite independently and say, and this is really from college faculty who said, we're getting students into us, and all they can write is a narrative. All they can write is a story. And they said, we really want students to be able to write an argument, to write, to inform, and explain. And so you'll see a real emphasis in our Common Core on that. So we heard, what I'm trying to give the idea of is that we heard from state teams across the country. Sometimes they took on something very specific, and sometimes they just gave us line edits to make sure we had real clarity. In March 2010, we set out the draft to the whole of the United States, and anybody could write in. Anybody could tell us what they thought of the standards. We had about 10,000 enterprising folks who did. So you could be a business person, you could be a parent, you could be a student, you could be anybody. And they again told us what they thought was important and not, what they liked and what they didn't. And we went back to the drawing board again, thinking about our 3 principles of evidence and focus and local flexibility. And by June of 2010, we had a set of standards that we felt we could be proud of. And so much of the credit for that has to do with the teachers and the faculty who hung in there with us and didn't let up until we had a strong set of standards. And soon after that, we had, and there are sort of several reasons, and we can get into this perhaps in another session, we now have 46 states that adopt it. It was many more than we thought. We thought we might have 12 or 13 because it was voluntary. The standards were there, but you could decide to do it or not. But we now have 46 states. We've got some headwinds. There's some political headwinds coming from something called the Tea Party. You might have heard about them. We just had the budget issue in America. So the Tea Party is worried about federal control. They're worried about this coming top-down, and so on. But we really consider ours a multi-state effort, not a federal effort, and that was key to the effort. So with that, I just want to say, and again, I've probably returned to my passion for standards, and sort of in concluding, thinking about the fact that a common standard is defined a quality education for all. It doesn't do it all, obviously, but it is a foundation, and I think there are several imperatives. There certainly are in America. One is a moral imperative, and that is that every child should have a first-rate public education, or education, whether they're in public or private. And here's how I define that. So when you're thinking about this, because I've been in many standards conversations over the last couple decades, and I think about, I have a daughter, she's grown, I have 2 grandkids, little ones, and I think about what I want them to know. What is that powerful knowledge I want my children, my grandchildren to know? And if it's good enough for my children, it is good enough and should be good enough for every other child in America. I don't get to say, oh no, those kids don't really need that. Who am I to decide that? Why would we waste that human potential? Right? So moral imperative. The second is a civic imperative. You know, a well-educated citizenry really should prepare students to be part of their culture, to be able to engage in dialogue with one another, to be able to be part of their community in important ways, and would really say that a stable democracy demands that. That if in America there continues, this chasm grows and does not close, we are going to have problems. The next is an economic imperative, because truly America won't be able to stay in the forefront if we cannot compete globally. If our businesses go elsewhere to get their employees, we're in trouble. So even as a country, we have to think about that. And if all of that aren't enough, the moral imperative, the civic imperative, the economic imperative, I can always fall back on my own self-interest, which is how long can I prosper? How long can my family prosper and have a rich life when huge swaths of my fellow citizens are not well educated? Which means they can't get a good job, which means poverty grows, which means anger and dissatisfaction grows. So there's this sense of it is in my own self-interest that I promote the full education of all. And so with that, I will close to just say, I think this is the conversation you are having now. There is none more important than this one, and I am glad to play a small part in it. Thank you.